Watch someone truly confident enter a room and you'll notice something unsettling happens to everyone else. They straighten their posture, they adjust their tone, they become suddenly conscious of themselves in ways they weren't moments before. This isn't the loud, performative confidence of insecurity masked by bravado. This isn't the aggressive posturing of someone trying to convince themselves as much as others. This is something deeper, something that operates below the level of words and gestures, something that fundamentally shifts the power dynamics of every space it enters. Most people spend their entire lives pursuing a confidence they can never achieve because they're chasing the wrong thing entirely. They think confidence comes from accomplishments, from validation, from building a resume that justifies their existence. But the confidence that actually terrifies people, the confidence that makes rooms reorganize themselves around your presence, comes from a completely different source. It's built not through addition but through subtraction, not through gaining external proof, but through destroying internal doubt, not through becoming more, but through stripping away everything false until only something immovable remains. The foundation. Divorcing self-worth from outcome. True confidence begins with a psychological operation that most people never attempt, severing the connection between your sense of worth and the results you produce. This sounds simple, but represents a fundamental rewiring of how the mind assigns value to itself. From childhood, you've been conditioned to derive worth from achievement, from approval, from comparison to others. Your value is contingent, earned, provisional. It can be granted, and it can be taken away. This conditionality is the root of all insecurity because it means your worth is always at risk, always dependent on factors partially or wholly outside your control. The confident person has performed an internal revolution where worth becomes inherent rather than earned, fixed rather than variable, self-determined rather than other-granted. This doesn't mean they believe they're perfect or superior. It means they've decided that their fundamental worth as a person is a given, a constant, something that exists independent of what they achieve or what others think of them. This decision is terrifying to contemplate because it removes the familiar mechanisms of self-evaluation and replaces them with something that feels like arrogance or delusion. The psychology here involves recognizing that the contingent worth model creates a state of permanent insecurity. If your value comes from achievement, then any failure threatens your value. If your worth comes from approval, then any disapproval threatens your worth. If your sense of self comes from comparison, then anyone who surpasses you threatens yourself. You're perpetually defensive, perpetually anxious, perpetually scanning for threats to your fragile sense of value. This hypervigilance masquerades as humility, but is actually ego in its most defensive and insecure form. When you sever this connection, when you decide your worth is inherent, something profound shifts. Failure becomes feedback rather than identity threat. Disapproval becomes information rather than worth reduction. Comparison becomes irrelevant because your value isn't relative. This shift doesn't happen through positive thinking or affirmations. It happens through a sustained confrontation with the arbitrary and constructed nature of conditional worth. Through recognizing that all the external metrics you've been using to measure yourself are games you chose to play, and you can choose to stop playing them. The emotional experience of this shift is initially destabilizing. Without achievement or approval to lean on, without comparison to orient yourself, who even are you? This disorientation must be endured. On the other side of it lies a bedrock confidence that nothing external can shake because it doesn't depend on anything external. People sense this immediately. They sense that you're not performing, not seeking validation, not vulnerable to the approval or disapproval they might offer. This makes you unpredictable and therefore threatening to people who rely on those mechanisms to influence and control others. Embracing outcome independence. The next level of confidence comes from genuine detachment from outcomes while maintaining full investment in effort. Most people conflate these, thinking that if you don't care about outcomes, you won't try, or that if you try hard, you must be attached to outcomes. But the confident mind maintains a paradoxical stance: complete effort combined with complete acceptance of whatever results emerge. This isn't resignation or not caring. It's recognizing that outcomes involve variables beyond your control, and attaching your emotional state to things you can't control is volunteering for suffering. The psychology of outcome independence involves a shift in what you derive satisfaction from. Instead of deriving it from results, which are delayed and uncertain, you derive it from the process, from knowing you did what you could with what you had. This process orientation creates a steady baseline of self-respect that doesn't fluctuate wildly based on whether things worked out. You can feel good about your effort even when results disappoint, because you're evaluating yourself on what you controlled rather than what you didn't. Emotionally, outcome independence creates an internal steadiness that others find both attractive and unsettling. You're not emotionally volatile based on wins and losses. You don't get euphoric with success or devastated by failure. You maintain an even keel that suggests you're playing a different game with different rules than everyone else is playing. This steadiness is confidence made visible. It signals that you're not dependent on this particular outcome, this particular person's approval, this particular opportunity working out. The liberation of outcome independence is profound. When you're not attached to specific outcomes, you can take risks that attached people cannot. You can pursue long-shot opportunities without the desperate energy that repels success. You can negotiate from strength because you're genuinely willing to walk away. You can be authentic because you're not contorting yourself to achieve specific reactions. This freedom of action, this willingness to act boldly without being crushed by potential failure, is what confidence looks like in motion. People find this terrifying because it makes you unmanipulable through their primary tools, hope and fear. They can't motivate you through promised rewards because you're not attached to getting them. They can't control you through threatened consequences because you've accepted worst cases. You become someone who operates from choice rather than compulsion, from preference rather than desperation. This autonomy threatens people whose power depends on others being attached to outcomes they control access to. The deep truth of outcome independence is that it actually increases your likelihood of favorable outcomes. When you're not desperate for a specific result, you don't emanate the neediness that repels people and opportunities. When you're not attached, you make clearer decisions unclouded by fear of loss. When you accept all possible outcomes, you can act with full conviction without the hesitation that comes from fearing failure. Paradoxically, not needing outcomes makes you more likely to achieve them, owning your darkness completely. Confidence requires integration of shadow, complete ownership of everything you are, including the parts you've been taught to deny, suppress, or feel ashamed of. Most people maintain confidence only by hiding aspects of themselves they judge as unacceptable. They present carefully curated versions, constantly monitoring to ensure their darkness doesn't show. This creates a fragile confidence that shatters when the hidden parts are revealed or threatened with exposure. The confident person has done something different. They've examined their darkness thoroughly, accepted it, integrated it, and owned it completely. The psychology of shadow integration involves bringing unconscious material into consciousness, looking directly at the impulses and aspects you've denied, and accepting them as part of your totality. This doesn't mean acting on destructive impulses. It means acknowledging their existence without shame or denial. When you've accepted your capacity for cruelty, for selfishness, for pettiness, for darkness, you're no longer vulnerable to being controlled through shame about these aspects. You can't be manipulated by someone threatening to reveal what you've already revealed to yourself. Emotionally, this integration produces a groundedness that superficial positivity never achieves. You're not maintaining confidence by lying to yourself about who you are. You're confident precisely because you know who you are, including the ugly parts, and you've decided that your worth isn't contingent on being entirely good or acceptable. This self-knowledge creates an unshakable foundation because there's nothing hidden that could undermine it if discovered. The process of shadow integration is uncomfortable and often requires confronting aspects of yourself that you've spent years denying. You must acknowledge your envy, your rage, your capacity for manipulation, your selfishness, all the parts that violate your self-image as a good person. But on the other side of this confrontation is a completeness, a wholeness that partial self-acceptance never provides. You become someone who knows themselves fully and stands in that knowledge without apology. This ownership of darkness terrifies people because it means you can't be shamed into compliance. When someone tries to make you feel bad about some aspect of yourself, you can acknowledge it without being diminished by it. When someone points out your flaws, you're not defensive because you already know and accept those flaws. This immunity to shame-based control makes you dangerous to people and systems that rely on shame to maintain order and hierarchy. Shadow integration also gives you access to power that people denying their darkness cannot access. When you've integrated your capacity for aggression, you can use assertiveness without fear of becoming monstrous. When you've accepted your selfishness, you can pursue your interests without crippling guilt. The energy that was spent suppressing these aspects becomes available for productive use once you stop fighting yourself. Developing unshakable internal standards. Confidence reaches new heights when you develop your own standards of evaluation and hold yourself to them, regardless of external opinion. Most people outsource their standards to their culture, their peer group, their industry. They evaluate themselves based on whether they meet external expectations. The confident person has inverted this. They've developed internal standards based on their values and capabilities, and they judge themselves by those standards while treating external opinion as interesting but not determinative. The psychology here involves a shift from other referencing to self-referencing as the primary mode of evaluation. Instead of asking, "What do others think of this?" as the primary question, the confident person asks, "Does this meet my standards? Does this align with my values? Did I execute this to the level I'm capable of?" The external question becomes secondary, considered for strategic purposes, but not for self-worth purposes. This reorientation creates a stable reference point that doesn't shift with social winds. Emotionally, having internal standards creates a deep security. You know what you're trying to achieve and why. You know whether you're meeting your own expectations. This clarity eliminates the confusion and anxiety of trying to please everyone, of navigating contradictory external expectations, of being buffeted by others' changing opinions. You have a compass that points to your true north, and you navigate by it regardless of whether others approve of your direction. The development of these standards requires deep self-reflection about what actually matters to you versus what you've been told should matter. It requires distinguishing between values you genuinely hold and values you've adopted to gain approval. It requires the courage to honor your own standards, even when they diverge from cultural norms or peer expectations. This process is how you become authentic rather than just different, principled rather than just contrarian. People find this threatening because you're not competing in their games by their rules. You're playing your own game, and you're judging success by your own metrics. This makes you incomprehensible and uncontrollable to people who assume everyone is competing for the same prizes by the same standards. They can't understand why you're not seeking what they're seeking, why their approval doesn't move you, why their disapproval doesn't deter you. Internal standards also protect you from manipulation that comes through moving goalposts. When your standards are internal, other people cannot constantly redefine success to keep you chasing validation. They cannot move the target to ensure you always fall short. You know what you're aiming for, you know when you've hit it, and external attempts to redefine your achievement as insufficient bounce off your self-knowledge. Mastering the art of comfortable confrontation. The final evolution of terrifying confidence involves becoming completely comfortable with confrontation, disagreement, and conflict. Most people avoid confrontation because it triggers social anxiety, fear of disapproval, fear of damaged relationships. This avoidance makes them malleable, easy to push around, easy to exploit. The confident person has eliminated this vulnerability by developing genuine comfort with confrontation as a necessary tool rather than a catastrophe to avoid. The psychology of confrontation mastery involves reframing what confrontation means. Instead of seeing it as aggression or relationship destruction, the confident mind sees it as clarity, as boundary enforcement, as the assertion of legitimate needs and standards. Confrontation becomes a neutral tool used when necessary rather than an emotional crisis. This reframing removes the charge that makes confrontation so anxiety-producing for most people. Emotionally, comfort with confrontation creates a powerful presence. People sense that you won't back down when pushed, that you'll enforce your boundaries, that disrespecting you has consequences. This doesn't require you to be aggressive or combative. It just requires that you're clearly willing to confront when necessary, that you're not avoiding conflict at the cost of your own interests or integrity. This willingness creates a force field that prevents most boundary violations before they happen. The development of this comfort requires exposure and practice. You must confront when it's uncomfortable, must enforce boundaries when it's socially awkward, must disagree when it risks disapproval. Each instance of choosing confrontation over avoidance builds the neural pathways that make it easier next time. You discover that most confrontations don't lead to the catastrophes you imagined. You learn that clearly stated boundaries are usually respected. People find this aspect of confidence particularly threatening because it means you're not a safe target for their disrespect, their boundary violations, their attempts to take advantage. They have to actually consider your interests and boundaries because you'll enforce them. They can't assume you'll absorb mistreatment silently to avoid confrontation. This makes you higher cost to exploit and higher risk to cross, which fundamentally changes how people calculate their interactions with you. The combination of these elements, inherent worth, outcome independence, shadow integration, internal standards, and confrontation mastery, creates a confidence that fundamentally alters power dynamics wherever you go. It's not confidence as performance or bravado. It's confidence as deep structural integrity that cannot be shaken because it doesn't depend on anything external. People sense this integrity immediately and unconsciously. They sense you're not performing, not vulnerable to their approval or disapproval, not controllable through normal social mechanisms. This recognition triggers an instinctive recalibration where they treat you more carefully, more respectfully, more as someone whose boundaries are real and whose presence carries weight. The terrifying part isn't that you're aggressive or threatening. It's that you're immovable, unmanipulable, fundamentally certain of yourself in ways that most people never achieve.